So you have a more practice dealing with this prohibition of doing businesses or these bans. We can see that in three examples. Number one, you have these new sanctions and trade committees in companies and law firms. You have the position, the new legal position of sanction experts in companies and law firms. And also you have more training program for sanction experts. So you need to keep up with the number of sanctions. Just in the case of Russia, in the last month and a half, 6 weeks, you have in from the United States 6 rounds of sanctions. So how to keep up, how to develop due diligence, how not to your company to be caught in these circumstances, because civil liability will be strict and criminal liability will be there if there is willfulness to commit or to evade these sanctions. Going on, we have been in 30 years ignoring that values can be part of foreign policy. We are in a pragmatism that have been even promoted from the White House in recent decades, and then we're backing with narrative of against terrorism, against corruption, supporting democracy, and supporting the respect of human rights. And then you have new regulation that is backed by this narrative. So I think for lawyers and practitioners, you are facing now a time where ethics and compliance, business and ethics dilemmas and compliance are now into play. That is very challenging because in many cases it will increase the cost. I remember that Rad was commenting at the beginning the reputational factor of doing business with countries under sanctions. So sanctions not only is the fact that it's banned, but if you get a license, you can continue doing businesses. But what happened with all the due diligence that you need to run? What happened with all the compliance work? It's costly. What about the risk of breaching a sanction? It's not the fine of the sanction. What about the years of probation that your company will be subject to it? So you have a very costly scenario, and you have lawyers and attorneys who has to work in this environment with the dilemma of business and ethics. How far can I go as a lawyer, as a general counsel with a company? How far can I recommend my business people, engineers, to do businesses with one company? What is the red line that they should avoid to cross? So I think now it's more than the law that lawyers may be aware of. They may be aware not only of the signal of the market, but also on the geopolitics that are surrounding all these businesses and these business transactions in the energy sector. I think there is a moment in which not only interest can run the legal profession and business people. They have to look at the national interest of nation, if they belong, if they have connection with these nations that are pursuing this foreign policy based on these values or principles. I think at this point, playing short-term games can be very risky for companies. You have the dilemma. I mean, it's kind of a mouse that is in a maze, and the mouse will be happy if following its interest to get the cheese. But if you follow the ethics and compliance and the big picture of the problem, you will be aware that you are in a maze. And I think that is critical at this point, because the network that have been created with sanctions is global. The country that is imposing most of these sanctions is the US and the UK, which both of them has one of the biggest financial systems in the world. If you add that Switzerland, in some sort of activities, sanctions they have imposed in freezing assets. So you have 3 of the biggest financial markets in the world that have ramifications that if not affecting a company or an individual directly, it may affect the companies and individuals that are surrounding that company and that person. So it will be risky of doing businesses, and I believe that is a reputational, and that will require due diligence. Costs will increase in doing these transactions. Sanctions intelligence for companies and individuals doing businesses. They need to get financial information intelligence. They need to get background check to individuals, and it's not only companies but governments. Don't think that sanctions are imposed just by coincidence or just looking out of in the air. sanctions intelligence, financial intelligence, military intelligence is backing the actions of the U.S., of the Department of State, and also the security advisors in the White House. So you have also companies providing services to governments in pointing out what are the more specific targets that can result in the imposition of sanctions, trying to reduce the consequences of sanctions to the population of these countries, because that's not the interest to cause harm to Russians, to cause harm to Venezuela, even though consequences will happen in the midterm. But you will require also those type of services to back that legislation that, again, is complex, is transnational, and without that will require the participation of legal services. And by the way, not only coming from the state. One of the interesting facts of also of this crisis is how corporations, McDonald's, Microsoft, Facebook, then also they decided to withdraw Russian market in many capacities. How all companies, how
law firms,
IOCs, international companies decided we're doing press release apologizing for taking opportunities of buying discount Russian oil, saying we're sorry we did that. I believe it was Shell doing that press release and saying, I'm sorry, we because they know they have the pressure of shareholders and stockholders that will put more pressure on this board to all companies to comply with environment, social, and government standards that are now under more scrutiny. So again, lawyers and practitioners and people engaged in this transaction, I think it's a time for a lot of discussion on business and ethics, and a lot to read and study on all these sanctions, because keeping up with them is very complex and difficult.